Of all the pubs in the world he had to go to mine. It wasn't actually my pub, but I used to go there after work. Plato's was my hideout. I knew Tony the bartender well. I liked to keep a low profile, so I wasn't thrilled to see him there. There's no doubt he seemed like a decent bloke, but he was unbelievably naive, and he'd always been teased and bullied by the other boys at school because they knew he couldn't stand up for himself. I remember one time when we were seniors I witnessed him being pushed and shoved by 3 upperclassmen. I was lying on the floor with a bloody nose, a swollen lip and 2 bruises under my eyes. I was sitting in my favorite pub wondering if I should leave. Tony noticed me and put my beer next to Eugene, and even though I wanted to leave I remembered my mom's lesson on teachings on politeness and simply greeted Eugene. "Eugene, how are you?" I asked him why he looked upset. He didn't answer right away and just stared at his beer. I hoped he hadn't heard me, but eventually he said my wife was cheating on me and I didn't know what to do. Divorce seemed like an obvious solution. I replied, "Are you sure, or just suspicious?" "Oh no, really, she's with him now. They literally kicked me out of my own house and left me alone." He nodded coyly, confirming my suspicions. "Yes, it's the same Eugene," I thought to myself. He hasn't changed a bit since he was a student, and it's frustrating to see him make the same mistakes over and over again. "So you're sitting here feeling sorry for yourself while your wife is in your own house, in your own bed, cheating on you with an arsehole, Eugene?" And his answer interrupted me before I had a chance to speak. "But what can I do?" "What do you want to do?" I asked. "I'd like to kick them both out of the house, but I can't stand up for myself. You know, Chase, my wife would get a good laugh out of seeing me get beat up." I said, "I'm getting so upset about this situation that I'm having a hard time controlling my anger. You know what this is like? When you're confident in yourself, when you feel good about who you are. You feel good now? Or are you walking down the street with your head held high?" I was hoping that my fiery speech would spur him into action, but he just sat there and didn't move, and I doubt very much that I'd suddenly become brave. And now that my disappointment was at its peak, what a pathetic little brat, I got up and took a $20 note out of my wallet and threw it on the bar for the 2 of us, and I yelled angrily at Tony, and he just nodded and went on chatting with the pretty blonde at the other end of the bar. "And wait a minute. Where are we going?" he stammers. "You and I are going to teach a lesson to someone when I drag him to your door." I growled, "Oh Chase, I don't think so." "Shut up, Eugene, get in the car and tell me where you live." He took me to his house. I asked where the bedroom was. He stammered anxiously. I grabbed him by the shirt and dragged him to the stairway. I looked down the hall. The bedroom door was wide open. This disgraceful behavior made me sick. Eugene's wife screamed as I grabbed her lover by the hair and pulled him away from the bed. Despite my tight grip, he managed to wriggle away and attempted to stab me in the head, but his movements were too limited and the blow landed on my shoulder. As Eugene's wife continued to scream, I quickly turned him around and delivered a blow to his temple, and he fell to the floor, his trousers dropping to the side of the bed. Eugene's wife's voice pierced the air with hysteria. "Who is this man?" Eugene froze in place, unable to comprehend the chaos that was unfolding in front of him. "Eugene, I swear if you don't do anything, I'll spank you." I nervously dialed the number. "Hello Mrs. Carter, I'm sorry to tell you the bad news. Your husband has caused a major scandal here." Mrs. Carter's voice on the other end of the line was full of worry and confusion. "Who is she and why do you have my husband's number?" I warned her to keep a close eye on him, and if he ever dared to do anything to my friend's wife again, I would not hesitate to take drastic measures. Without waiting for an answer, I ended the conversation and switched on my mobile phone camera and took a quick picture of Eugene's wife before she hid under the covers. I then took another picture of her lover, who was beginning to come to his senses, and without hesitation I sent both pictures to Mrs. Knife. The lover looked up in shock as he realized I had taken his phone. He pleaded, "I just sent a picture of the 2 of you to your wife. You can't do this. I have children. It's too late. The damage is done. You should think about the consequences before threatening a man who has just slept with his wife and kicking him out of his own house." I hissed, throwing his trousers at him and saying firmly, "Get dressed and leave Eugene's house now. If Eugene finds you with his wife again," I growled, "I won't be so lenient next time." And while he hurriedly put on his trousers, I took a picture of his driver's license on my phone, put it back in his wallet, and threw it back at him. I turned to Eugene, who was standing by the bed with a shocked look on his face. "It's up to you now, Eugene. I can't decide everything for you. You married her, so now you have to deal with her." I've seen the headline, "Grocer's Daughter Found in Love Nest." I couldn't believe it when I recognized her. Lisa Schultz, at least that's her maiden name. She went to school a year after us. Her father owns 2 grocery shops in the area, and she's constantly walking around the shop like she's a queen. Well, she replied, annoyed, "Please leave the room, I'm going to go and get dressed." Eugene, go with him, go with him. I glanced at her timid husband and looked at his slumped shoulders. He seemed so used to obeying orders that he didn't even realize. "Eugene, this is your house, your bedroom, your wife." I reminded him, "I'm going down there, but if I were you I wouldn't obey orders, I'd start barking orders," I said as I turned to go downstairs, the sound of her screaming at him still echoing in my ears. Sitting at the kitchen table, I listened to the heated argument between Lisa and Eugene. Lisa seemed to be saying the most, but Eugene's voice rose above hers from time to time. The commotion seemed to die down as I finished my beer. I half expected her to come downstairs with his lifeless body in tows, but when she finally appeared she was alone. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on me, then she started walking towards me. Her gaze was like a lethal weapon, and I knew that I was in trouble, that Eugene was probably dead upstairs. I knew I was in trouble. Eugene was probably dead upstairs, and now that she was coming at me, I wished I could protect myself. I looked at her confidently and replied, "Yes, I'm satisfied." She said mockingly, "You think you're so smart, but mark my words, he won't be gone for long. I'll give him no more than 3 days before he comes crawling back begging for forgiveness. I'll make him regret it, and he'll be grateful for it." Despite her smug smile, doubts began to creep into my mind as I considered her words. After all, she probably knew him better than I did. Suddenly, my confidence wavered. Just then, Eugene appeared at the bottom of the stairs carrying a suitcase. I saw him in the doorway, but Lisa had her back to him. "Are you ready to go?" I held my breath, wondering what he was going to say. After a few moments of hesitation, Eugene finally spoke, "I'm ready, Chase." I left the kitchen and headed for the front door. As we neared the door we heard her scream, "I'm serious, Eugene, don't come back." I realized that I could have completely ruined this poor man's life, and as bad as it was, I knew she could have made it worse, and all of a sudden I was filled with doubt as to whether or not I'd made the right decision. And we went back to Plato's house, and I left him with the car, and we agreed that he'd stay the night at the motel, and I let him have it. The next night, at 7 o'clock, and I got him his first mustache, and I hardly slept at all that night, and I was so happy to be there, and I was so happy to be there, and I was so happy to be there. I questioned my decision and regretted getting involved in this story. I promised myself I'd never do that again. The next day, as usual, I got to the Plato around 6 o'clock. Tony opened me a Miller beer and put it on the bar. "How's your friend from yesterday? He looks a little down," Tony said. I took a sip from my long neck. "He's got problems at home." But I was interested in Tony's opinion. "Have you ever been involved in someone's family problems?" He gave me a quizzical look. "I'm a bartender, it's part of the job," and with a bitter smile he replied, "No, I mean it. Yesterday I played a part in his decision to leave his wife. She treated him badly. But now I'm starting to question my behavior." "What makes you question yourself?" "I think it was her self-confidence that made me intervene. She was so sure he would come back to her, and if he did she vowed to make his life miserable. I probably should have stayed out of it from the start. I can safely say he's not on his knees right now," Tony said. "Oh," I laughed. "What makes you so sure?" I turned around to make sure he was really coming in. He smiled and said, "Hi Chase." "Hi Tony, the drinks are on me." Still smiling he said, "Chase, tell me honestly, do you think you could give me a few fighting lessons?" "Who are you going to fight?" I asked, confused. "No one. I just want to be able to stand up for myself if I have to. I should have thrown that guy out, not you. I want to be ready for the next one." He locked eyes with me, and for the first time I saw determination in his eyes instead of fear. His eyes burned with anger. "I'm just tired of constantly backing down," he continued. "Today I finally defended my position, and that gave me strength, and I want to continue in the same spirit." "Did you defend your position? What did you do?" He was surprised and forgot to fire me. He joked, but the truth was better. He wouldn't let me go today. He came to the State Street shop where I work and called me into his office. I thought my time was up. He first mentioned that he had spoken to Lisa and she claimed that I had left her. He warned me that she was angry and that I should have gone home right after work if I knew what was good for me. I felt like a chastised child and was ready to answer him with a short "yes sir," but I stopped and thought about what you would do in this situation. He smiled at me encouragingly and I said, "I'm sorry, but I can't accommodate you, sir's repeated violence towards me was more than I could take." He reacted so violently I thought he was going to choke on his cigar. Chase, I can't tell you what a wonderful thing it is to finally be able to get up and face someone, especially my father-in-law. He's the most horrible person I know, second only to you of course. What he said made me laugh. I never thought of myself as intimidating. Well done, I answered in general terms. When I asked him if I would be fired, he said no. He mentioned that he never interfered in his employees' personal lives. He smiled and nodded approvingly as if in agreement. That's great, Eugene. It's good to earn respect, isn't it? If you really want to learn, you should go to a professional. Maybe you're right, he replied. We chatted for another hour, then he called Tony to pay the bill and left. He seemed to be in high spirits. Maybe he'll surprise us and turn out to be a decent guy. I realized I should get going. I had a date with Mel tonight. Mel was my soul mate. In a way, we had been together for 6 months. It was my longest relationship to date. She has a sense of humor that puts a spring in my step, a trait I find hard to find in other women, and she's intelligent and really interested in me. And although I have a strong connection with her, the word love has never entered my vocabulary. After saying goodbye to Tony, I went home, took a quick shower and changed my clothes. And when I arrived on Mel's doorstep, we were planning to have dinner together, then go to the cinema, and finally make out at her house or mine. But it wasn't just the color that caught me off guard, it was the way she was dressed. Before me stood a stunning girl in scarlet, a corset made of red satin hugging her every curve and accentuating the shape of an hourglass. I stood with my mouth open, wondering how long this state had lasted. I vaguely remember how she led me inside. She deftly unbuttoned my shirt and then my belt buckle. Well, Chase, it looks like you're glad to see me, she teased at that moment, and I summoned up all the charm I could muster to reply, "Come on." Mel gently led me towards the bedroom, offering to continue in a more comfortable setting. The next week Tony followed me into the room. He whispered to me, "Hi Chase." He's been out of the woods for a whole week now, but he was still smiling. "Eugene, how are you? Are you still enjoying your lonely life?" 0 a.m. I thought she was going to show up at the shop and make a scene, but she didn't. Are you really determined to make this decision? Do you really want a divorce? Yes, the process can take some time and my lawyer said it can be extended to a year if she wants. At first she seemed nice. Maybe she was the only girl who was nice to me. I knew she wouldn't change her behavior no matter what I said. I just shook my head. "How long have you been married?" I asked. "Since the second year after graduation," she replied with a shrug. She didn't even ask me if I wanted to get married. She dragged me into a jeweler's shop and pointed to an engagement ring and jokingly said that she wanted this ring. He grinned, laughed. "What next?" I asked. "It looks like you really want a divorce. What are you going to do after that?" Mr. Schultz promoted me to manager, but I still felt like I was just a warehouse boy. I started to think about starting my own business and I asked him if he had any hobbies or skills that could be turned into a profitable venture. At first he was silent as if he was considering a possible idea. I already knew he was a wimp, so nothing he said would change my mind. "What's the matter, Eugene? Are you collecting women's underwear?" "I even made one for my neighbor's daughter. She loved it." For a moment, I wondered how I could be sitting next to a man who allowed his wife to kick him out of the house so she could cheat on him, and at the same time he was building dollhouses, and why I always found myself in such situations. I hesitated for a while, wondering if I should continue to help him, and finally I thought, damn it, even though my father has a pickup truck, he'd never let a stranger drive it. I can drive it, but I'd rather do it when your wife isn't around. 30 Lisa goes to her parents' house, or at least that's what she always says. And she's there on Tuesdays, which I haven't checked, but I wouldn't be surprised if she's got another boyfriend stashed away somewhere. Wouldn't be surprised. I did my best to hide my disdain. I knew I had to ask, but I was sure it would work out. Meryl came over for the weekend with an overnight bag and she stayed until Sunday afternoon. Eugene didn't even cross my mind at that point until Tuesday morning when I remembered that I had to borrow Dad's truck after work. We drove by his house to see if there was any movement there, and there was only one light on, but Eugene noticed that the kitchen light was always on when his future ex-wife left. When the door opened, the headlights illuminated the empty lot where Lisa's car was usually parked, but it wasn't until the overhead lights came on that I noticed Eugene had all the wood he needed. Switching off the ignition, I got out of the car and took a closer look at the tools. They were light but of good quality. "Wow, Eugene, you've done a great job here," I said. "Thank you. I'm very passionate about this line of work, he replied. My eyes darted around when I saw the shelves above me, although when he mentioned his hobby I instantly thought of a doll's house. What I saw was very different from my expectations. They were more than dolls' houses. These miniature houses rivaled even the most skillful carpenter or cabinet maker in their finesse. Did you really make them by hand, Eugene? I asked admiringly. Yes, I've always loved making dolls' houses, he replied. I said they were amazing, and Eugene laughed and thanked me, saying that his wife, Lisa, had teased him about playing with dolls' houses. We then drove to the storage unit we had rented, and after unloading our belongings we went to Play-Doh where his car was parked. I suggested we stop for a drink since it wasn't too late, and he agreed. I know someone who can help you, I said to Eugene. My girlfriend Mel has a bachelor's degree in marketing. Maybe she can help you with your marketing plan for the doll's house. Do you really think so? I'm not going to quit my main job just yet, he explained, and I reminded him that I would talk to Mel this weekend to get her opinion, and after a beer we headed home. Eugene was still staying at the hotel, but he had already mentioned that he was planning on getting a small flat. I was a little disappointed as her weekend usually started on Friday night, but it gave me a little time to plan a surprise for her. I needed to cook something special for Mel, but since I wouldn't see her until the next day, I decided to stop by Play-Doh on my way home from work on Friday. Tony replied, I know a great recipe, and if you want to make a delicious breakfast, you should use real Canadian bacon, not ham, to ensure the best taste. Tony, you described the recipe very well. Could you write it down for me? I'd be happy to pay you for your help as a favor to a friend, and I've done you a favor in return. The next day I drove over to Mel's house and double-checked the grocery bags to make sure I had everything I needed. I hesitated for a moment before deciding whether to ring the doorbell or not. I waited until 8:30 in the morning before ringing the doorbell. After a while I noticed that the peephole on the door had gone black and she was hiding behind the door waiting for me to come in. As I walked in, the door closed behind me and I saw that the girl I loved was standing in her underwear. There, she was yawning with her hand over her mouth and her eyes half closed. It was an incredible sight. She sleepily wrapped her arms around my neck and smiled. What took you so long? I laughed and realized what a wonderful woman she was. Would you like to eat before or after? She said she had to get up. I put a plate of perfectly cooked eggs Benedict in front of her and she said, Honey, I didn't know you were a foodie. I hope you like it. I sat down with the plate and savored the first bite as she finally answered my question. She had recently found out that her husband had been unfaithful to her and she was devastated, and we were both staying home late to support her and cheer her up. The mention of an unfaithful husband reminded me of Eugene and his doll's house. I wanted to ask her something before I forget. I have a friend who is a master at making wooden dolls' houses. He is looking to turn his hobby into a profitable business. I was wondering if you have any marketing ideas. Do I know your friend? Why are there so many cheating spouses, and if you're going to cheat, why get married? I couldn't understand it, I said. For someone who used to be a playboy, you have surprisingly traditional values. That's one thing I admire about you. I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled and shrugged, and she smiled back. She paused and thought for a moment and said, or he could target a market by promoting them as unique products through a broker so he could get more out of them. But first I'd need to see some of them, and I wouldn't have contacted a broker if I didn't know any better. Well, no problem, I assured her. He'd already moved out of his house, but he had a few more products in the dumpsters. There are still a few products in storage. A mischievous grin appeared on Mel's face. If I help your friend, I will ask you to pay me for my services, she said. In return, I would like to spend more time with you. Mel laughed and said, why don't you call your friend and see if we can meet him tomorrow at the place where they keep the dolls' houses? I'd like to see his dollhouse, so I'll see you in the bedroom. She laughed, and after leaving the kitchen I quickly picked up the phone and dialed Eugene's number, 00. As soon as the conversation was over I scurried into the bedroom to pay off my debts. It was another memorable evening spent with Mal, and as we pulled up, Eugene sitting in the car was worried and I introduced him to me. After he opened the pantry and examined the pieces, Mal's reaction was the same as when I first saw them. Thank you, she marveled. I've been doing this since I was a little girl. I started building dolls' houses as a hobby 5 years ago, to which he replied that it was Chase who had suggested I sell them. I've got a problem. There's no electricity here. I need a workspace with electricity. How much space do you need? It doesn't have to be big. a place like this will suffice. Mel thought for a moment, then suggested that the apartment building I live in has a similar-sized garage with electricity. I rented a garage. My car can be parked on the street for a while you set up the workspace. Eugene was so grateful that he couldn't stop thanking her. He didn't seem to have encountered many acts of kindness from others in the past. Realizing this, I jokingly said I'd have to borrow Dad's truck again, which made him sheepish. I calmed him down and said no, not at all. If Mel trusted you to leave Lexus on the street, then so do I. Tears welled up in his eyes and he struggled to find the words. I don't know how I can ever thank you both. We went out to dinner after she and I agreed to bring his tools to M. This man is so nice, M said on the journey. Yes, Hek is a good man, I replied. I just wish he was braver. He was bullied a lot at school, even by kids younger than him. They did whatever they wanted to him and he never fought back. His wife kicked him out of his house to be with her lover and he just cried and complained. I thought he would divorce her and now he wants it. Maybe I played a part in that decision. It made her laugh and she laughed for a long time. He may not be cool but his talent speaks for itself. She said these dollhouses are really impressive. She paused for a moment to consider her next sentence carefully. On Tuesday, we moved Eugene's stuff into Mel's compact garage and sorted through his collection, and Eugene was as excited as a child on Christmas morning. We discussed the house briefly before Mel changed the subject, whereupon Eugene Chase mentioned that you were going through a divorce, and she sympathized. I'm really sorry to hear that. Is there any chance of you and your wife ever reconciling? Eugene shook his head no. He replied no, and then Mel gave her a piece of advice. You know what they say, Eugene? I don't know what she's trying to say. She asks Eugene if there's someone special waiting for you. Eugene awkwardly admits no. I've got an idea. I feel as if Mel is going to offer something. I think you should meet one of the girls at the office. She suggested you don't see Nancy. I think she made a mistake in letting him come home, but they're attending marriage counseling at the moment. Bev, Mr. Jensen's secretary, is very bright, very talkative, and very lonely. I looked over at Eugene, who looked frightened again. Mel continued to insist on her idea, and before I had time to intervene, she offered to set up a double date with Eugene, but the invitation had already gone out and I had no choice. Eugene's eyes lit up at the prospect of a double date with you and Chase. Do you really think she'd like me? Tell you what, I'll see if she's available, and if she is we can arrange to meet on Friday. No wonder he gladly accepted the offer. Once again I chastised myself for being nosy because I couldn't make it Friday night. I decided to go for a beer with Tony on Thursday after work. I was taken aback by his question. A new girlfriend? No, what makes you think that? Tony leaned in close to me and said that a woman had been coming on to me every night that week. Tony giggled and added, she just came in and stood right behind you. I turned slightly and greeted her. Hi Lisa. I'd like to know what makes you think you have the right to interfere in other people's affairs. We were happily married until you did. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Maybe you are happy with your marriage, but your husband certainly isn't. I would like to ask you a question. Why do you think you can treat him like an empty shell? I know I said hurtful things, but I've changed my mind and I promise I'll be nicer to him. I rolled my eyes at her sudden change of mood. Lisa, you do realize that he still works at your dad's grocery shop, right? Look Lisa, Eugene has made it very clear that he's not going to make up with you because you've already said you've ruined everything. I'm sorry, Lisa, but I doubt your sincerity, and I think Eugene does too, so why should you care? No matter what, you will always be your father's baby girl and you will never have to worry about money. I replied. She looked at me. He wouldn't have left if it wasn't for you. Can you at least say something nice about me? You're wrong, Lee. I'm just trying to make him realize that he deserves more. He would have left you anyway. The anger in her eyes grew, and that wasn't the end of it. She hissed and suddenly finished her drink in one gulp and got up to leave. Tony came up to me and was impressed. Wow, you really put her in her place, he said. Did you hear all that? I asked. Oh yes, every word. Was she really that horrible, or even worse? I grinned. She was very nice just now, and I decided to stay and have a couple of beers with Tony until 10, and then go home on Thursday night. The next night we met at my house, as it was more convenient than meeting at Mel's house to party. Mel brought her friend Bev with her and Eugene arrived shortly after her. Although I had seen Bev in Mel's office a few times, I didn't know her well. Bev turned out to be a bit of a loner, which made Mel think that she and Eugene might make a good couple. Dinner went well, everyone had a good chat, and both Eugene and Bev seemed to be getting more cheerful. Mel noticed them stealing glances at each other and gave me a wink, and as a result we went dancing, Eugene's less than deft moves on the dance floor causing Bev to laugh uncontrollably. Apparently, for the first time since I'd met him, he'd actually ended his relationship with his ex-wife, and I'd noticed a subtle change in him. He'd started to become more confident. I went to Plato's on Monday night after work. Tony was shocked to see me. "What happened? I've never seen you here on a Monday before," he exclaimed. "Hi Tony," I replied with a forced smile. "No, I'm just a bit distracted. I wanted to have a drink and talk to someone." I sighed and he asked me what I was thinking about. I asked Mel. I'd been spending the weekend with her, and all she'd talked about was Eugene and his amazing wooden dollhouse. She even helps him sell them. I was happy for them, but it was getting on my nerves. I grumbled. Just then my phone rang. I looked at the screen and saw that it was Mel. She was probably here to apologize. I told Tony before I answered the phone. "Hi dudes." Mel says hi. "Hi Mel." I answered her. She quickly explained that she was going out of town with Eugene next weekend to see Jason in New York. Jason was the agent I had first asked for help from Eugene. The agent she mentioned when I first asked her for help. "We've brought 4 different styles of houses to show him, but we can't pack them safely onto the plane, so we'll have to make the trip back and forth." Mel said that while I don't know anything about marketing, I don't see why they'd have to go all the way to New York to find someone to sell them, but I couldn't argue with her experience and enthusiasm. After all, it was I who offered to take me. I said that it was hard to say at this point, that I'd be in the middle of talking to Jason about Eugene's brokering services. We still need to work out housing for our trip to New York, and I have a lot of things to do, so I can't promise anything right now. "I see," I said in a frustrated voice. Mel didn't seem to notice the hint of annoyance in my tone, or maybe she just decided to ignore it. After exchanging parting words, I ended the conversation, and Tony, who was standing next to me cleaning glasses, overheard the disappointing news. Mel was planning to go to New York for the weekend, and Tony tried to defuse the situation by suggesting a possible date with a friend of his, a glamorous blonde woman. I just laughed. He tried to distract me. Mel and I didn't say it outright, but we had made an unspoken agreement that we were exclusive to each other from our 3rd date onwards. That fact calmed me down and gave me confidence. "Thanks Tony, but I think I'm going to say no. I'll spend a weekend on my own, but I'm going to make a deal with you. If you ever catch me meddling in someone else's business again, please don't forget to give me a hard time to make me good." Tony giggled and looked at me thoughtfully, before agreeing. "Sounds like a good plan. I promise I'll keep you in line." Wednesday was a hard day at work, and to make matters worse, Mel didn't answer the phone when I got home. I was in a terrible mood, but as I walked up to the door of my flat, I was pleasantly surprised to see the seductive Mel leaning against the door, holding a white bag, and she smiled. "I brought Chinese food." I immediately embraced her. Her lips and mine kissed passionately. Our meeting was as stormy as it had ever been, and at last we both ran out of energy. Mustering up our strength, we went to the kitchen table to eat dinner together. I wanted her to stay a little while longer, but she said it was time for her to go. 30 p.m. I knew that Mel and Eugene had been driving for a couple of hours, and that she had not called to say goodbye to me before she left at about 11 o'clock. Didn't call to say goodbye to me, which annoyed me. I was about to leave when the phone rang. I wondered who would be calling at such a late hour. "Hello, beautiful, are you there already?" 00. I started to drive, but Eugene got behind the wheel about an hour ago, so I could take a break. "We just passed through Youngstown, Ohio, and before I get ready for bed I wanted to call and talk about something funny," she said with a smile. Eugene's face was as red as a tomato. She still giggled. "Don't worry Eugene, I'm just kidding," she reassured him. "If he's shy, cover his ears." "Wait a minute, he's driving, forget about it," I joked. "I just wanted to get the lay of the land before the weekend gets crazy." "Hey babe, I want to wish you and Eugene good luck. Drive carefully and call me when you can." We ended the conversation with a few kisses on the phone. Tony overheard part of my conversation. He added, "You've got to marry this girl, Chase. She looks like a real keeper." I left some money on the counter and went home. For the first time in months I went to bed before midnight on a Friday. I was determined to get a good night's rest, and it wasn't until the following Monday night that I heard her voice again. "Hello handsome." She greeted me. "How are you?" she said tiredly. I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "Okay babe, I'm glad you called. I would have been worried if you hadn't said goodbye." I hung up the phone, and even though it was still early for me to go to bed, I decided to get a beer from the fridge and lay back in the recliner and relax. Tony's words kept echoing in my head. You have to marry this girl. The idea of that took me by surprise, but I couldn't shake it. I have watched too many of my friends end up in failed marriages. For example, my friend Jack married his high school sweetheart and 3 years later found out that she had cheated on him. An angry Jack found the man she had cheated on him with, and a fight broke out in a bar across town which hospitalized Jack for 3 weeks. In addition, Jack's ex-wife got most of their property in the divorce. He despised her and still harbored thoughts of revenge because there were so many uncertainties that the idea of marriage seemed too risky. Nevertheless, I didn't mind having her move in with me. Since I hadn't heard from her, I decided to give her a call to discuss plans for the weekend. Chase, I was just about to call you, she exclaimed excitedly on the phone. She sounded younger than usual. Guess what it was? I don't know, but it was probably something really good. I grumbled. Oh, it was more than good. It was just great. It was just great. Honey, you both should be proud. You did a fantastic job. I tried to sound more enthusiastic than I actually felt. Have you thought of anything fun to do this weekend? 00 Meet at Plato's, and then Eugene invites us to dinner and then dancing. Oh Chase, we have to dress up. It doesn't have to be a suit. You can just wear a sports jacket. I asked. Yes. He said we'd go to some nice place for dinner. While I mumbled, I guess I could put up with Eugene for a couple of hours. Friday night when I walked into Plato, Tony nodded his head in greeting to me and signaling that Eugene was seated. I have a strange habit of not sitting with my back to the door. I thought to myself that I could put up with this for a while, and as I walked towards the card table I couldn't help but notice how often I've been saying this lately. Hello, beautiful, I greeted Mel as she sat down next to me, putting my arm around her and bending down to kiss her. I bent down to kiss her and she whispered, I miss you. I replied. She said yes, and Eugene couldn't wait to share the news with me. Eugene said it was unusual to use her full name, and I looked at her quizzically. Melanie. Yes, she replied. On the way to New York, he asked me what Melanie meant, and Eugene added, I thought Melanie was a beautiful name, and I asked her if she minded me calling her that. I told him he didn't mind, as long as he was okay with me calling him that. Mel said, and I couldn't help but laugh. Well then we'll use your full name but shorten, as I replied jokingly, and as I looked up I noticed Eugene looking towards the bar for the second or third time. Is everything okay? I asked. No. His answer didn't sound very convincing, and Bev noticed his behavior. Do you know them? I asked. Yes. Eugene replied that he was a year above us. He came with Lisa. You guys were just sitting down when Lisa arrived. I noticed the man glanced at us and then smiled. Lisa leaned forward and looked in our direction as she smiled. It was obvious it was indeed her. I asked. No need. I really didn't care who she was sleeping with now. I just thought she had better taste than him. Just in case. They all stood next to Eugene and looked down at him. Eugene Pitts said that he pronounced it the same as he did in school. Some people just don't want to grow up. Lisa looked at Bev and asked, who is she? Another one of your fans. Girl number 304. I've already taken your husband, and I don't want to take your clients again. Lisa's expression of helplessness gave Pete the perfect opportunity to confront Eugene face to face. He grabs Eugene by the shirt and demands an apology. Eugene quickly jerked his hand out and Pete couldn't react in time before he fell to his knees in pain. I explained to him what was really going on, and I told him to get up to speed on the situation, that the bastard had brought Eugene's ex to cause trouble, but Eugene seemed to have everything under control. Eugene let go of Pete's hand and told Tony to lead them to the exit. Come here, both of you. I'm only going to say this once as a courtesy. I want you to leave. I don't want to see any of you here again, Tony said firmly. I almost felt bad for her. Tony almost threw them out, but he surprised us by giving us another free drink. I knew Eugene was defending himself. But he thanked Tony for the drink and apologized to us all while we were enjoying our free drinks. It was getting late. Eugene didn't explain where we were going to eat. He just told us to follow him, and after a while we arrived at Chez Paul's. Look, I knew you needed that sports jacket. Mel smiled, and as the waitress opened her car door I quickly grabbed the jacket and put it on, then followed her into the restaurant. Eugene was beaming as he checked in at the restaurant. We sat down at a table and Eugene took the wine list, which he handed to me, admitting that he was inexperienced in this area, and asked me to help him pick out a good bottle of wine. Even though I was feeling uncomfortable about the potentially high price, by the end of the evening, we had agreed that Chez Paul's had lived up to its reputation. The waiter carefully placed the bill in a small black wallet next to Eugene, making me anxious for him. But before I could say anything, he pulled 4 brand new $100 bills out of his wallet and put them in the cash register, instructing the waiter to leave the change, again surprising me with his generosity. I plucked up the courage to ask Mel to dance, and as we walked towards the dance floor I heard Eugene ask Bev to dance as well, and as I danced with Mel I noticed that she was looking at Eugene and Bev with a slight smile. I couldn't help but reply that it looked like he was a good student. As the evening progressed, our main focus shifted from dancing to conversation at the table, and Eugene shared his plans to quit his job and devote himself full-time to the permanent creation of a dollhouse. I was shocked at Mel's surprising support of his plans, as she is usually a rational and balanced girl. Mel said that this guy was taking a large portion of the profits. Eugene's expression became serious and he turned his head to look at Mel. I hadn't told him everything, she admitted it. Then Eugene turned his head to look at me again, obviously deep in thought, and as I took a sip of my long neck beer, the mere mention of the price blew me away. I even let the beer run out of my nose in a snotty and hoppy ridiculous mixture. I couldn't stop coughing, I couldn't answer anything but nod my head, and the scene was awkward with all eyes on me. I excused myself to the bathroom and blew my nose while cleaning myself up. When I returned to the table, I noticed that the waiter had cleaned up while I was gone. I have received orders for 4 more pieces, but I need to make a special shipping container for each one to make sure they are properly protected on their way abroad. I always knew my girlfriend was a highly skilled person, but I never fully realized how talented she was. I replied that as we chatted, I noticed that we hadn't had sex in over a week. I was so proud of all involved. The evening had been incredible. Whether it was the satisfaction of a job well done or the desire for intimacy, it didn't matter. The evening seemed to fly by like a flash. Mel loved the cuddles that followed the intimacy and I felt that I loved it as well, especially with her. The words Eugene had said suddenly popped into my head. We lay there, I muttered softly and Mel giggled and nodded. Yes, 20, but Jason would get 50% of that, she clarified. 50% because he was just the middleman. I exclaimed in disbelief. He wasn't just a middleman, he and a few others were legends in my business world. They were the James Bonds of marketing, dealing with very unique clients. Because she immediately understood what I was thinking. No, I didn't sleep with him in New York, she reassured me. I spent 2 nights with him at a conference over 2 years ago. I hadn't met him until I met you last week. Our meeting was purely business, she clarified. Jason usually worked for buyers. When the Maharaja wanted a new yacht or a private jet, he would contact Jason. Jason would find the perfect choice, telling him all the details and requirements. His clients always demanded the highest quality and were willing to pay the highest price, and once word of his house got out, he had a steady stream of orders. Before his clients move on to the next trend, Eugene will be rich off your ideas. What about you? You still don't know anything. I told you I wouldn't take anything. I'm helping you, but Eugene insists we both get a small share of the company. He wants to give me 10 shares, and you too. He wants to give me 10, and you too, but that's between us. He wants to tell you about personal shares. He already has a company shares already. Yes, we need to find a way to protect his assets from his ex-wife before we get divorced. Then the company issued 2,200 shares of stock which are currently registered in my name, but after Eugene gets divorced I'll transfer most of the shares to him and only 10 shares you'll leave me. She said, I think I will give up his shares, and please tell him to add my shares to yours because you are the one who really deserves them. She explained that in the end Eugene met me in Plato a few days later, and after talking for a few minutes he agreed with me, and although he was upset we agreed that now he always buys me a beer. Gene called Tony to his side and graciously announced that all the booze was now his, and he quickly ordered us both another, and after a sip of his beer he changed the subject to something new. What did she say? I replied, and Eugene explained that apparently she had had a serious talk with her father and it seems he found out about it and was very angry. He sighed and said she was begging for forgiveness with tears in her eyes. I have never seen her like this before, can you give her another chance? He replied, so much has happened between us, hardly anyone can change so quickly and completely. I keep thinking that every time she leaves the house the old footage resurfaces. I wonder if she's seeing another man. He took another sip of his beer and mumbled, no, but maybe she'll show respect to her future husband. It was business as usual. Lisa was a thing of the past. The divorce was finalized and she had nothing to do with Eugene's thriving business. The money was rolling in and Eugene and Mel were reaping the rewards. As for me, I had a steady job, a new car, a cozy flat, and I worked hard to make them happen. If I wanted anything else, I knew that I would have to work hard to get it for myself nonetheless. I was grateful for the occasional free beer, and then Mel calls me. She's worried, insists we need to talk, but doesn't want to reveal why over the phone. After work I arrive at Play-Doh a few minutes early. I've already ordered 2 beers by the time she comes in, and I scoot over and try to get her to sit next to me, but she chooses to sit on the other side of the booth instead. She smiled nervously and reached for her beer bottle. As I was deep in thought, trying to make sense of the situation, I heard Mel say, "There's no easy way out of Chase." Em and I turned to look at him at the same time, and Mel's tone was slightly annoyed as he said, "What are you doing here?" I said I'd take care of it. Eugene replied confidently, "Did you really think I was going to let you see him alone?" Mel should have been sitting next to me, not him. It didn't take me long to realize what was going to happen. I couldn't help myself, but anger seeped into my voice. "Are you both betraying me?" I growled. Eugene jumped up sharply and tried to calm me down. "There was no chasing. We'd never do that to you, but we've discussed a few things, Chase, and we'd like to see what happens next between us." "What?" "I want more. I need a partner who is all about me, someone who will always be there for me. I dream of a family, kids, in a house with a white picket fence, and when I try to end it with her she just replies, 'Well, that's the end of it,'" Eugene explains, and I sit there in disbelief, unable to make sense of what I've just heard. We only kissed for the first time last night, but we spend a lot of time together at work and find that we have a lot in common. We have the same quest for life, and I appreciate the fact that we have this kind of friendship with no interests at stake, Mel said. "I feel the same way, Chase," Eugene interjected at the right time. "I hope that this doesn't change our friendship. I've been thinking about my nature, and realized that I don't like to think things through carefully before I act on them all. The points, I tend to act on impulse. Now what I see is my supportive friend and my girlfriend betraying me. It feels like cheating and it hurts me. I wish you both all the best for your future together. I want nothing to do with either of you from now on, and Eugene, if you try to contact me or get close to me, no matter how much of a bully you think you are, I swear I'll beat the shit out of you, and I mean it." "Chase, please wait," Em shouted as I was already about to leave, and I hadn't even been paying attention to Tony, who had called me by my first name as I left, and not being able to answer him, I just had to leave. Tears filled my eyes as I drove home. It was like nothing I'd ever felt before because of a woman. "Don't cry," I scolded myself. "She's just another 304. When I got home I rushed to get a cold beer from the fridge. As I took a few sips of the beer I was overwhelmed by the pain I was feeling. My thoughts were engulfed by a whirlwind of emotions. I didn't know if it was worth it to fight for her. I wondered if I should go back and confess my love to her. Did I really love her? I'm sure I enjoyed being close to her, but was that synonymous with love? But if I do love her, can I fulfill her wishes? That was my main thought, and to be honest I wasn't sure of the answer. After 2 more beers and a constant stream of unanswered questions, I eventually slumped back in my chair and fell asleep even though I had to work the next day. On Friday I decided to do something out of the ordinary. I hadn't been camping for years, but I threw my tent and trusty fishing pole into the boot of my car and hit the road. I found a peaceful spot along the Vermilion River and sat down and even managed to have dinner. And since it was so hot that it was hard to sleep in the tent, I decided to settle down in a hammock that night. The azure waters gently swirled, adding a bit of serenity to the night. It was at this moment that I finally found the answer to my question: do I really love Em? It made me realize that my views on relationships were changing. The idea of settling down and getting married no longer scared me. Mel was the closest thing to being in love. It made me believe that there was someone in the world that I needed, someone worth fighting for, someone I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. When Tony saw me in the doorway he had a surprised look on his face. "While you're still alive." He put a glass of beer in front of me. "I've stopped waiting for you to come back," he confessed. "No, I'm still hanging in there. I'm just not fitting in these days." I knew Tony was trying to comfort me, but his words didn't make me feel any better. "No, that's not true." She was right. Mel wanted a family life and she knew I could never give it to her. We had such good times together in the bedroom it was hard to let go, I confessed, and I noticed Tony's smile. "I know you've changed your mind," he said. "She's come round a couple of times since then." "Really?" I asked. "Yeah, they're still together." She asked me if you'd ever forgive her, and what did you tell her? I know it must have been a shock to you, especially Eugene, but I told her that when the pain subsides you'll be able To look at it rationally and realize that they didn't mean to hurt you. I have to admit that when you stopped coming I started to worry that maybe I'd misjudged you. You're a smart man, Tony. I just needed to be alone to think about it, and I wasn't ready to share my deal with anyone, even you. If I ever see Mel again, can I tell her that you've forgiven her? I know it would mean a lot to her, Tony asked me, and I thought about it for a while before finally answering him. But I quickly dismissed the idea. Of course, I answered him, and he grinned back, affirming my decision. You're a decent guy, Chase, he said. He seemed pleased with our earlier conversation about Mal and Eugene because now he leaned in closer, resting his chin on the bar as we hadn't seen each other for a long time. Who are you spending the night with now? My self-imposed isolation is coming to an end today, I said, banging my fist on the bar. By next weekend I went on a date with Charlene. She's a lovely girl I met at the grocery shop, but it turned out that I didn't really like her. She just wanted to talk, even if it was in intimate moments, and behind Charlene there was Sandy, Michelle, and Eva. And Carol, who had an insatiable appetite for coming to see me 3 or 4 times a week, exhausting me, and after that I felt completely worn out. But how can you be exhausted when it's been 7 months since the night Mel and Eugene talked about their relationship? I was sitting on the bar stool I always sat on, listening to Tony dream of the day he'd be a pub owner, when suddenly he fell silent and stared somewhere behind me. I turned to see what had caught his attention. I still looked at Eugene uncertainly as he spoke to me, and I sat in silence, contemplating my next move. I saw your car as I passed through the car park, he mentioned me. I'm happy for you, I replied, looking straight ahead. Mel said you forgave her. I don't think that's any of my business, is it? I remained silent. I love her, Chase, and she loves me, he continued. I remained silent. I'm really sorry, Chase. I'm really sorry. It's my fault. I wish it had been someone else because I know you care about her. But will you marry her? Are you ready to spend your life with her? I guess we'll never know, will we? I feel like an arsehole, but at the moment I don't care. Of course I know that eventually I'm going to have to wish them a happy ever after, but right now I need to let off some steam, and I hope that applies to me. You're the only real friend I've ever had. We're getting married in May next year, he said, pulling something out of his wallet. I left my phone number on the business card, and he said, and put the card on the bar. I was taken aback by his request. I gazed into his eyes and found them brimming with tears. I hope you find the strength to forgive me. With that, he walked towards the door, wiping away his tears as he went. Tony was silent, his eyes fixed on me. But no, they acted nobly and turned to me before taking any action. Yes, Tony said. And I picked up my card. I'll think about it, okay, I said. And Tony gave a knowing smile, but I knew one thing for sure, and I know I've said it a million times, but I want to say it now more than ever, that I'll never meddle in anyone else's business again. I turned around to see a woman desperately trying to free herself from a man who was holding onto her wrists, and despite all her efforts, she couldn't get free. I can't stand by when I see a man abusing a woman. Her name was Rita, and it turned out that this man was her abusive boyfriend. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore, and decided to kick him out, but he forcefully grabbed her by the wrists, and threatened to take her home to hurt her. He's very brave when it comes to hurting women, but Tony and I weren't going to let him get away with it, and together we escorted him out the door, and as he left to go to his car, he vowed to get back at Rita. I contacted the police and tried to describe the situation to them, but they started to aggressively interrogate me, asking me if he was a legal tenant and if he had physically harmed her, and asking me if I had any visible injuries or reports of previous violence, and I was so frustrated that I decided to end the conversation and turn to another person for help. Eugene came to Rita's house, and as we entered the flat we heard a man arguing in the bedroom. Rita stayed in the living room, and Eugene and I confronted him. As we approached him, he smashed her clothes hard with a knife. He suddenly and without hesitation pointed the knife at us. Eugene performed a quick stunt as if you were Stephen Cagle. I couldn't help but admire Eugene's skill and wondered in the back of my mind what course he was taking. Rita quickly gathered up a couple of rubbish bags, and we stuffed our assailant's clothes in them as Eugene removed the flat key from his ring. I kindly gave her my spare bedroom until she got back on her feet, and almost a year later she still lives with me. I want to make it clear that after a few months in the guest room, she moved her clothes into my bedroom for the first time. I realized that every night I would go to sleep thinking about this woman who had captured my heart, a feeling I had never experienced before, and I knew I was in love. After a romantic dinner at our favorite restaurant, Saturday night we would walk along the lake shore under the light of the full moon and I would get down on one knee and ask her to spend her life with me. I'm sure she'll say yes, and Eugene has already agreed to be my best man, and besides, I recently learned from a mutual friend that he intends to give Rita and me 5 shares in his company as a wedding present.